went to Paris, was in that environment that's obviously very fashiony again, came back, was about to start my job at Accenture doing strategy consulting. And I watched this documentary called The True Cost, which gets into all the sustainability challenges, both environmental and social, around the fashion industry. And it just felt like this aha. It was like, wow, that my like engineering background, my understanding of processes and how industries work and how things are made, and like going into the strategy consulting to learn how businesses work and like what are business challenges at their highest level. And then also being a kid who loved fashion, loved sustainability, and care about both those things deeply. Like I finally saw how all of my worlds could kind of come together, and that was really exciting. So this was when I was like 21, 22. And from there on out, I was like, that was my mission. And pretty quickly after researching the space, I really honed in on this specific problem of like, felt like there was a lot of investment and research in upstream. How do we make things better in like mushroom leathers and all these kinds of fancy textiles? And then downstream, a lot of investment going into recycling, and how do we address the end of life of textiles. But just felt like for whatever reason, there was a lack of innovation in how do we help people buy better? How do we extend the life of things that we already have? And how do we kind of keep things in the like existing economy before we have to figure out how to recycle it and bring it back to the beginning?
Owning a garment for longer periods of time and keeping it in use reduces the garment's overall environmental impact by keeping that product in circulation and in use for a longer period of time, right? Extending the period for which a garment has an impact. Poor-fitting clothes are at the top of the list for why clothes get tossed, donated, returned, and otherwise just unused. How can consumers and brands alike extend the life of their clothes, reduce waste caused by returns, as well as keeping products in circulation for longer? Alterations are a big piece of the puzzle to solve this. Still at the part of the value chain surrounding brands and consumers and that point of sale, how can we extend the life of a garment, keep it in use for longer by increasing the emotional attachment of a garment to its wearer, right? And that's through better fit. There are so many additional players in the market that are supporting the extension of products' lives, reducing the environmental impact of the individual garment and the industry as a whole. Now, alterations help garments fit better, increasing the wearability of a product, and of course, reducing the need for returns. Consumers need to think more about how can they repair their products instead of just replace it with a new item. And brands need to support this type of transition and educate the consumers on the options they have available and support the craftsmen who are conducting that type of work. Today, we speak with a company who's supporting this transition and making alterations a lot more easy for consumers and brands alike. Today, we speak with Rachel Sterling, the co-founder of Alternew, a fashion tech startup connecting the industry to its circular future through repair and alteration services. They partner with brands and retailers alike through to tailoring and repair service providers, allowing end users, consumers like you and me, to have a more seamless alteration service and creating unique and better fitting products that result in, again, a reduction of impact by extending the life of their garments and reducing returns. We talk all things entrepreneurship, fashion tech, and the importance of craft in both brand management and sustainability. Rachel, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us at the Growing Green Ventures podcast. Before we jump into our conversation, I'd love for you to take a moment to share a little bit about who you are, your background, both personally, professionally, academically, and we'll jump in from there.
Sure. Again, Rachel Sterling. I'm the co-founder of Alternew. We'll go more into it, but in short, Alternew helps every brand offer alterations and repair through a national network of local tailor shops. So really bringing brands into the circular economy and making it easier for customers to access these types of post-purchase services. And then me as a person, originally from Chicago, grew up in Chicago, but have lived all over the US as well as in Europe, and kind of beyond a person who loves fashion and circularity. I'm also just a nerd at heart. I was an engineer and I have a million hobbies, so happy to talk about any of it.
Amazing. But we're here to really talk about this idea of repair in the fashion supply chain, and how a business like yours is acting to reduce the environmental impact and create a system of circularity. I'm curious to know how, from a high level perspective, right? How does your business address these issues, and how does it create a circular fashion system?
Yeah. So there's two ways to think about it. One is fairly obvious, is the repair side, right? We
Hmm.
need to extend the life of clothes. The way that things go now, especially as consumers, we're less familiar with how to repair our own things. So when things need repair, they end up in landfills more than they end up
Yeah.
back in someone's closet.
Hmm.
So that's one piece, is we need to make it easier for people to get access to professionals who can help them get things repaired,
Hmm.
as well as ultimately we need to help people learn how to do some of the simple repairs like a button replacement and things like that on their own. But
Hmm.
um, before we even get there, let's just get the professionals in the room and
Yeah.
help people get access to them. But the less obvious side is also on alterations. And for that, there's two things. One, when clothes fit, people want to wear them, so they get them repaired rather
Hmm.
than returning them, rather than them ending up in landfills. So fit is fundamental to people liking what they own, wearing what they own, repairing what they
Hmm.
own. But also being able to offer alterations reduces returns, which is a major both loss from a cost standpoint to the fashion industry, as well as a waste driver for the industry. As well as when we have a bunch of, like, right now, what goes on in the industry is
Hmm.
you have folks upstream in production having to make guesses on what sizing things need to be. And especially, we're trying to get to even more inclusive sizing. Ultimately, it's hard. A line that we say at Alternew is that clothes are mass produced, but bodies are not. So ultimately, we need to have some
I
sort
love
of
that.
last mile of fit.
That's
And we
great.
think that that is alterations. But
Hmm.
today, the experience is challenging. It doesn't feel affordable. It's so
Hmm.
separated and put on the customer to solve rather than the brands to support customers in solving.
Hmm.
Um, and we think that that is also a major driver of what ends up being overproduction that just leads to extra waste, because people are, again, not wearing these things, they're returning them, they're not purchasing it in the first place because it doesn't
Yeah.
fit, etc.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, obviously, fit is a huge issue within the industry, and there's been so much money from VCs and whatnot trying to address this concern.
Hmm.
But again, it's almost you're on the other side of the coin, right? These companies are
Hmm.
trying to produce, like, showcase um, the fit of their garments before purchase, and you're enabling the customization in a way of the garments post purchase, correct? So that it
Exactly.
fits truly the
Mhm.
end consumer at the right time, at the right place, with the right person. Um,
Exactly.
so in general, though, like, paint for me a picture of where exactly this business falls within the value chain. Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah, it really is at that post purchase. It's kind of like right before purchase and post purchase
Gotcha.
experience. There's other places where alterations and repair can come in for a
Hmm.
brand, because even, you have a whole shipment come into the store and there's a couple shirts that had buttons that popped off when in the shipping process, or something needed a repair, and you still want to sell that stuff. So there is a place for alterations and repair even kind of earlier in the journey. But what we're really focused in on is that right when the sales advisor is working with the client to figure out what's going to be the best fit for them of the stock that they have, and then right after in the getting things altered, getting things repaired even in the months later, years later. So we're kind of part of this part of the brand experience that really is nearly untouched today. Post purchase, you're somewhat left out on to your own devices as a consumer, and your only real way that you're wrapped back into the brand is when they're trying to get you to come back to buy. This is another thing that we think needs to be solved. How can a brand actually extend the experience into the post purchase journey, but in a way that feels authentic and not transactional? Reaching out and saying, Yusuf, like, we know you bought this jacket a year ago. How's it going? Do you need any repairs? Does it need an alteration? Is it sitting in your closet and we need to get it to fit better for you? This also can tie into other business models that, like, I'll happily talk about alteration and repair all day, but this is also when they could be, hey, do you need something altered? Do you need it repaired? Do you want to resell it? Do you want to, like, move it to rental? Like, if it's not being utilized in your closet, let's make use of these clothes so
Hmm.
that we don't just have waste either sitting in closets or in landfills. We're actually utilizing the products that have been produced already.
But what you said really intrigued me because it reminded me of something that happened a few years ago. The U.S. government, federal government, passed a Right to Repair Act specifically around technology and computers, and primarily a case against Apple because they weren't able to
Mm-hmm.
allow local technicians and electricians to, they weren't able to access certain key components. And obviously, these brands, these larger companies are designing not for repairability at all. They're designing for they're designing for one-time use effectively, and so they're predetermining that these products won't have a second life or will have a shorter lifespan. And so the idea of the consumer in general having the right to repair, having the ability to change their products and extend their life and alter their products, right, which is very much in line with your business, is so key. And it used to be the norm, right?
Mm-hmm.
Kids used to wear clothes their mothers made, and that was just so normal. You'd have, I mean, obviously it's a completely different world, but people used to have 2, 3, 4 outfits and that's it, but that lasted them forever. And I think that when we think about what type of sustainable world we want to build overall, not just in fashion but in general, one
Mm-hmm.
that's just for people, one that's just for the planet, this idea of repair needs to be a part of the equation. And I don't think that it's actually been really front of mind specifically. It's been like a segment of the fashion industry
Yeah.
for a little bit. I remember when like Nudie Jeans had like repair options in their store and whatnot, and a few other brands were like pioneers and they had these only own brand repair components in store.
Mm-hmm.
Great sort of customer engagement, things like that, but it hasn't really been widespread. And I feel like, and I'd love to hear your take on this, the idea of tailoring and fixing your clothes further down the line, cobblers, right? I had a guest on the podcast, Samuel Falzone. He works with cobblers and he upcycles old footwear with new soles, and he's working
Mm-hmm.
with cobblers. I mean, I can't remember the last millennial or Gen Z person in my community that's went to a cobbler for something.
Mm-hmm.
That's not there, and those businesses are dying.
Couple of things in what you said that come to mind. One, I mean, just because brands don't offer it today does not mean that they don't want to be able to offer these types of services, because it has so many benefits to the brand that go beyond circularity. The challenge is just, one, hiring these types of services is really outside of their core competencies, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're creating and selling product, and now you're trying to hire on staff that's going to supply a service that's also one off. Every single product is going to need a slightly different thing, and every consumer needs a slightly different repair or alteration. So it's just very outside their core competencies. It's challenging to hire for that.
Mm-hmm.
There's turnover there, just like there's turnover anywhere else. A whole other pricing model too. So it's just like very challenging for them to even figure out how to start to approach, let
Mm-hmm.
alone things like, it tends to be a loss leader because, again, it's a whole other pricing strategy and business model that needs to be thought through.
Mm-hmm.
It requires space, it requires equipment. This is stuff that stores do not have. And so, more of a story as a result, most of these brands cannot figure out how to solve it on their own and just don't bother, even though
Mm-hmm.
they know it could increase customer acquisition and retention. Because when folks know that you have their back, basically you're standing behind your product and you have their back, customers come back for that kind of stuff. We talk to a lot of people who say, oh, well, the jean, like where I buy my jeans, they do hems, and that's kind of a more common thing you can find. And then we talk to them and they're like, do you buy all your jeans from them? And they're like, yeah, absolutely. I always know they're going to fit. And that is exactly the point. How can we extend that beyond the couple brands who can offer hems? Because this is a brand loyalty point. This increases repeat business. This is about customer retention and acquisition, as much as it's about reducing returns, reducing textile waste, reducing emissions from the products that are being put out on the market. And the other thing that you had mentioned earlier, that about right to repair and that all going on in kind of related industries in fashion. One, there's multiple bills already on the table in New York and California,
Mm-hmm.
that are mirroring what's already gone on in Europe, where there's extended producer responsibility. In effect,
Mm-hmm.
you are producing something and putting it out on the market, you are responsible for the waste that you are potentially creating, and supporting customers and extending the life of those products.
Mm-hmm.
You see that with even in France, where they are now giving, I don't know what the exact right term is off the top of my head, but it's almost like a budget for customers to be able to spend upwards of 20 euros towards getting their things repaired, their clothing repaired. Um, that kind of stuff will come to the US just like all other green regulation does. And so, how can
Yeah.
we help brands get in a position where they can support those types of offerings while also achieving all these other business benefits that I'd already mentioned
Mm-hmm.
around reducing return, increasing loyalty, etc.
Yeah, yeah, no, completely. And like with everything, where the U.S. lags Europe in a little, in a decade or two with these legislations, but nevertheless, companies like you are actually allowing other companies, and industry leaders to get ahead of the curve, even if there isn't a legislation. They're able to effectively do the same thing. Fingers
Yeah.
crossed, right?
And
I
respond to
mean,
the customer demand, because even
yeah,
before
because
the regulation comes, the customer demand is here. People
completely.
are tired of the greenwashing. They're over it. They see right through it.
Hmm.
As well as people are tired of their things falling apart. Like, it is so frustrating to spend $100, $200 on a coat and then the button falls off in a month. And especially since most people don't have access to the tools they need to repair it, it's just, why are brands putting basically a weekend project onto their customers
A
when all they
weekend project.
wanted
I
was
love
just
that.
to,
That's
yeah, that's the problem. And brands don't want to do that either. It's bad for business. So how can we
mhm.
help brands, at least when that kind of stuff happens? How do we help brands make it so that the customer knows to call them and say, hey, how can I want to get this fixed? And then the brand can support and take credit for that experience, and it be this joyful, delightful experience rather than the kind of hassle that it is today.
Hmm. Hmm. Rachel, I before we jump into further discussions around sustainable fashion, circular fashion, I want to highlight you and understand a little bit and give our audience a little bit more context as to why you're addressing this problem in the first place. Why are you thinking about repair, and why fashion as a problem to solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So my journey here, I
Yeah.
mean, as a kid, I was really big on both like going green and all like the kind of language of that era, sustainability. I remember when the not the true cost, but the inconvenient truth came out, and that was just like highly circulated. And so like even as a kid was already like very keen on like sustainability. How are we going to solve this? This is a problem. As well as like was a big fashion kid. I learned how to sew from my grandma. I would sew clothes and costumes all the time. That was like how I spent most of my free time growing up. I was a very like creative kid. Um, Project Runway was my favorite show. But I didn't want to be a fashion designer. And like when you're in high school, at least for me, when I was in high school, I was kind of like, well, if I don't want to be a designer, then I guess I can't work in fashion. Like it really, the fact that it's an entire industry that has, it has finance jobs just like every other industry and things like that. It didn't fully like resonate. I was like, I don't really want to be a designer. I'm not trying to be like that's just not what I see my future being. I'm more of like this tech mathy girl. I don't want to do that. So I just like thought I couldn't fit into the fashion industry. And then when I went to college, I did mechanical engineering. This was like a very different pivot, and there's kind of a lot of silly pivots within my various choices of college degrees, but nonetheless, I graduated with mechanical engineering. Really knew I didn't want to be a mechanical engineer per se. I think I just liked being able to break down problems. I really process information like an engineer. I like understanding how things work. So I think that's what attracted me to that degree more than like the potential job opportunities. And so therefore, after I went into strategy consulting, which kind of allowed me to kick the can down the road on deciding what exactly I wanted to do. And it was in that time, it was like I had just graduated. I had moved to Paris and was living in Paris to learn French. I'm also a very big like language person, and like like to be connected with like the global community. So went to Paris, was in that environment that's obviously very fashiony again. Came back, was about to start my job at Accenture doing strategy consulting, and I watched this documentary called The True Cost, which gets into all the sustainability challenges, both environmental and social, around the fashion industry. And it just felt like this aha. It was like, wow, that my like engineering background, my understanding of processes and how industries work and how things are made, and like going into the strategy consulting to learn how businesses work and like what are business challenges at their highest level. And then also being a kid who loved fashion, loved sustainability, and care about both those things deeply. Like I finally saw how all of my worlds could kind of come together, and that was really exciting. So this was when I was like 21, 22. And from there on out, I was like, that was my mission. And pretty quickly after researching the space, I really honed in on this specific problem of like, felt like there was a lot of investment and research in upstream. How do we make things better in like mushroom leathers and all these kinds of fancy textiles? And then downstream, a lot of investment going into recycling, and how do we address the end of life of textiles. But just felt like for whatever reason there was a lack of innovation in how do we help people buy better, how do we extend the life of things that we already have, and how do we kind of keep things in the like existing economy before we have to figure out how to recycle it and bring it back to the beginning. And so zoned in on that and decided that that was the business that I was going to create. I come from a very entrepreneurial family. So like my whole life, the idea of like owning my own business was just a part, like it just seemed like an eventual thing. And it felt like I finally knew what that was going to be and what my career was going to be dedicated to, like the problem I was going to be solving for my career. So yeah, I can go into also like the journey then, because that was many years ago now, and I didn't immediately go and start that business. But that was at least the journey to the sustainable fashion space.
No, that's really good context, and it honestly, I mirror a lot of that on a personal level. You mentioned to me, going to Milan to do your MBA at Bocconi and then working within these large fashion houses, but you always knew that you wanted to start something. Can you speak to how you reverse engineered your career to get from consulting and being in the business world in this space to then making that leap into entrepreneurship?
Yeah. So I'm definitely a big planner, and I'll share my story, but want to be clear, this is in no way like to say how one should become an entrepreneur. But for me, it was really, again, at the point that I realized I wanted to solve for how do we extend the life of clothes in making the industry more sustainable. I understood that by like 21, 22, but I did not feel like I had the industry experience or the chops to be able to go and run that business straight away. And so for me, I knew what I effectively wanted my founder slide to be, that I felt would make me both credible and confident in being able to create the business that I'm running today. And that was that I wanted to understand how, again, business strategy worked. I was just about to start a career in at Accenture doing strategy consulting. And I knew I wanted to land myself in a practice that was going to develop my understanding of the space. I landed in the customer insights and growth strategy practice, so that was perfect. I was working in thinking about, again, customer strategy as well as insights, so analytics, data, working with analytics teams, very early machine learning, AI type stuff. And then I felt the next piece that I needed was fashion. Like I needed to be able to speak to what is it like actually in the industry, as well as if I wanted to support the industry, I needed to understand what they're going through on a level that wasn't as an outsider, but as an insider. So that's why I went and did my MBA at Bocconi. Bocconi is a top MBA program globally, but also is uniquely has a luxury business management concentration that's very integrated in the luxury world of Italy. And I felt like being able to not just learn about fashion, but learn about it in a country that's very known for being kind of a leader for the industry, as well as working at the luxury level, because luxury is very much both a trendsetter as well as a business trendsetter. In a lot of ways, they have the flexibility to do that. That felt like the right route in to start to learn about the industry. So went to Bocconi so I could go work at some top luxury houses. I did that. I worked at Valentino. There I was doing, again, customers, CRM strategy, analytics, working with the retail teams. So kind of clienteling, retail ops type stuff. And then went and worked at Bulgari, where I was helping them set up their innovation hub. That was an like brand new thing for them that was tied into LVMH's La Maison de Startups Accelerator. And so with that, I was able to both see like what's it like at headquarters, working with the stores, what are the stores going through, how do we set up pilots with startups, how do we scout startups, how do we integrate that into the store experience. So I was able to gain a lot of super hands-on and valuable experience there that also helped me gain a lot of empathy for what are the challenges that the industry is facing today. And then the final like Girl Scout badges, I call them, that I felt like I needed to collect or earn was the like startup badge. So I came back to the US, worked at a Series B startup. There I was setting up and then running their Den analytics team. So getting my hands back into the technical side. So I felt comfortable leading in teams of engineers and being a part of that side of the world, since I had been so heavy on the strategy and business side for the past, like the previous years. And with all that coming together, then I felt like, okay, I've got what I need to execute on this vision that I had had for a while. And throughout that experience, it was like coming up slowly with the name and what would the business model look like and how would we actually implement this? What's the go-to-market strategy? So learning that while keeping this business in mind helped me really develop it to a point where I was super ready to go once I've collected all my Girl Scout badges.
I think that's a really practical way of approaching this. You know, obviously everyone's different, but for those interested in entrepreneurship, those interested in sort of planning their career or having that aspiration, I think that's a very wise way of approaching this. And I think a lot of people could replicate that in their own way. So yeah, I mean, kudos to you on that. So then you had this idea for this business, and you were collecting your Girl Scout badges, as you said. But was this, and you know, you wanted to address the sustainability issues in fashion, amazing. But was this idea of extending the product's life the problem you wanted to solve?
Yeah, my original idea was, and this kind of carried with me for a while, was I wanted to effectively, I was trying to create what I called closet concierge, where you would give me everything in your closet that needs anything. Dry cleaner, needs a repair, needs to just be spruced up in some way. And you don't got to know where it needs to go. You don't got to figure that out. You just give it to me. I'll get it to the people it needs to go to and get it back to you. Because exactly like we had discussed earlier, how millennials and Gen Z don't even necessarily know the word cobbler, let alone that that's the person you take your shoes to.
Yeah.
And so that was my whole thing, is like, we can't even Google the right things anymore. So like, why worry about that? Just bring it to me. I'll get it to the right people. So, and that, again, that was the idea that, I mean, it probably was a little bit looser than that, but that had evolved from the beginning. And was up to the point where I was like ready to go and launching it. And then decided to partner with my now co-founder, who was building kind of a similar, was building a different business, but in the same space of alterations and repair. So yeah, so that is all to say, like, yeah, it was effectively the same idea. And it was very much like this alterations and repair space from the jump.
Amazing. How did you guys meet, you and your partner?
Yeah, this is like a fun meet cute. But so again, in my collecting my Girl Scout badges, one of the Girl Scout badges I felt like I needed was a like circularity sustainability badge. And so I was still living in Italy at the time, working at Bulgari, and saw that the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which again, leader in circular economy, research. It's a great foundation. They had a certificate program at the time
Yeah.
that was from linear to circular, and
Mhm.
it was like a 10-week program done remotely because this is 2021, like just kind of still in that COVID-y era.
Yeah.
Um, and so I did this program so I could, again, I knew a lot from self-study effectively about circular economy, about the circular economy, but I wanted something that showed a little credibility. And in that program, it was like 300 people, but they would put you in these like Zoom breakout rooms every session. And so I happened to be put in this 5-person Zoom breakout room out of 300 people with Nancy, and she like that we didn't even, I think I mentioned that I was living in Italy, but I'm American, all this stuff. That was all.
Yeah.
Like in this chat, there was nothing really. But she LinkedIn messaged me and was like, "Oh, I'm actually going to Italy next week to Rome to visit friends." And I was like, "That's funny. I'm moving from Milan to Rome. We should just grab an aperitivo. Like
Yeah.
let's meet in person. Like imagine
Totally.
that." Again, this is like COVID era, so this was
Of
like quite
course. No, that's a rarity. That's a treat
yeah.
right there. Yeah.
And so we hung out. Our first time ever meeting was in Rome, and we again, she was talking about what she was doing in the alterations and repair space, and I was like, "That's awesome. I'm also trying to do stuff in that space." So we just stayed in touch,
Hmm.
and stayed in touch for probably like a year and a half, checking in on each other's progress, and then finally realized in like the early part of 2023, like actually we both are doing similar things, but we have very different styles that are very complementary.
Mm.
And so, wouldn't it make sense for us to do something together instead?
Okay. And was she based here in the United States or?
Yeah, she was in New
Okay.
York the whole time.
Cool. Okay. Okay. And so she was working on this alteration idea, which is already a space that you're very knowledgeable in, you want to address, like you kind of pinpointed that and highlighted that as where you want to head to. When did you guys, how did you get involved from a professional standpoint? How did you actually start working on this business?
Yeah. So, how it started is that, I mean, being co-founders is like no joke, and I think that this is actually what I would recommend anyone who's um looking to start their own thing. I think it is so valuable to have a co-founder, but you need
Mm,
to treat it like you're getting married to somebody, because it's this idea, especially if both of you are coming into the space with an idea, a thing that you want to realize, then it's very much both of your babies. It's not some co-founderships where it's like the one co-founder had the idea and the other co-founder wanted to be a part of an idea. That was not our situation, and it's not the situation
mhm,
for a lot of folks. We both individually are very vision oriented people. We both had an idea of what we wanted the future of fashion to look like. We both had a vision of what alterations repair should look like in the future, and our visions were very similar, but nonetheless it was something that we both had an opinion on how things should go. um, and so therefore, I mean, you need to treat it like a marriage in that this is your kid, because there's going to be a lot more of making sure you both align well, are really strong communicators, are able to like be empathetic. Like literally it's like a relationship, and more so than like a normal colleague or your friends or stuff, where like they can do things and you're like, oh, whatever. Like this is where you both are so involved and attached, and care so much that incredible alignment is essential. um and so I highlight that all because we knew that going in, and so we did spend 3 or 4 months where we were both kind of like just doing light work together, just seeing how we like collaborating with each other. Would just work on small things like, let's put together some financial models and see what that looks like. Let's just put together some decks, and like kind of slowly edged into this. Nancy was already full time on her previous business idea and was like transitioning to this, and I was still working another job as well. So we were trying to balance both of that and slowly collaborate and see how we like collaborating before like 4 months later deciding, okay, we're going to go all in. And even before that, we also did this, like I had Googled and found something that was like co-founder dating questions effectively. And it literally just like asked
smart. Very
yeah,
smart.
I highly encourage it because it asks things like, what is the pace that you want to grow this business at? Are you trying to be a VC backable company? What is like those kind of questions are essential to be on the same page about, because it
Hmm.
really impacts the decisions you make, who you take money from, how fast and how hard you're working, and at what times. And so being able to like upfront, like front load those questions and getting that solved so that we knew we had the same vision for the pace, for the scale, for the way in which we were going to take money, for the why we're doing this, all of
Yeah.
that alignment's so important.
Hmm. Hmm. No, I think that's super smart, super wise. I had a business partner once for a clothing brand I started many years ago, actually, and he's still one of my best friends to this day. But yeah, shout out Wasim. But I just remember that time. It was like the trust and the relationship was so much almost deeper than like a relationship with a partner in a way.
Yeah.
There needs to be like there's really, I mean, from the get go, it's not like you're like
Yeah.
building up together. It's like
Yeah.
from day one, we need to trust each other more than anyone else, and there needs to be such an open line of communication.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean,
you
I
know,
even had to learn, and I think that's something we have been working on this for the past year and a half. And I
mhm,
think that's something that is like a day. I mean, again, just like a relationship, it's a daily effort, because
mhm,
you don't even necessarily know yourself well enough to help someone else understand yourself that
yeah,
well. And
exactly.
it is something where, like, even I think my first year of us working together as co-founders, like I knew the importance of all that. I wanted us to be aligned, like logically, right? Like I wanted us to be able to both communicate the same, like we have the same vision, we have the same, all those things I had mentioned before. But the like literal day to day of being able to recognize I can't treat her just like, oh, she's my friend. I need to treat her more like a true partner.
Mhm,
Like again, like a marriage, because with my friend, if they, if they say something a little funny and the like it doesn't communicate it exactly the way I would communicate it, or if like I do something that like bothers them a little bit, like you just let that slide, right? You see your
mhm,
friends every once in a while, they're their own person, you're your own person.
yeah,
But when you're in a relationship, it's much more a reflection of you, and when it's your baby, it's much more like you have an opinion about the parenting style kind of thing. And so that's having to switch my mindset of like, no, I really need to over communicate, if anything.
mhm, mhm,
And we need to create a space where we can over communicate, and it's not nagging, it's not nitpicking, it's just keeping that line of communication open and honest, so that we're not letting things brew in the background that we're not talking about out front, and letting that come out in weird and bizarre ways otherwise. So that is, I mean, I just to say you can both so logically know that you should be doing that, and it's still a learning process daily.
completely, completely. I have to ask this question because I think it's a component that doesn't get a lot of discussion. You know, you were working full time. Been a professional for obviously for since you graduated effectively. You know, how did you cope with both your personal finances during this journey, and how did you guys raise funds for this project of yours?
Yeah. Um, no, I think this is so important. And then I have some friends who, as founders, they are huge risk takers, and they are just like,
Yeah,
we will jump and a net will appear. And I love that for them. I am not that. I am much more risk adverse.
yeah.
I and care a lot about being like financially independent and
Hmm.
stable. And
Hmm.
so for me, I mean, that's part of why, like coming back from Italy, I did not actually have enough in the bank to be able to do my startup straight away. I think I
And
probably
what do you when you say that? What exactly do you mean? Do you mean like having like an emergency fund for 6 to 12 months of living expenses already saved in Pull cash? What do you mean
yeah,
exactly by that?
yeah, happy to be like fully explicit. So like
Right.
I had already like savings and things from when I was in my consulting days, and
Mm-hmm.
had built like, and when I say savings, I should actually say like retirement, some investments,
Mm-hmm.
cleared my debt, that kind of stuff.
Perfect. Yeah.
But I didn't have enough like savings literally to both survive off of, to fund my business off of, to give me like personal runway to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm also someone where it's like I like to keep a much larger buffer. Um, and I did not want to have to like go home and live with my parents. There's nothing wrong with that. It was
Of
just
course.
I
No.
wanted to go live in like, and I was living in expensive cities, like post. I mean, Milan is not cheap, and then Rome is cheaper. But then I went
That's not
we're back
nothing,
to
you
the
know?
US. Yeah, it's not nothing, and I was living
Yeah.
on my own as an expat. Then I came back to the US and I moved to San Francisco because I wanted to experience the tech scene there. San Francisco
The
is
opposite of cheap.
expensive, yeah. Um, and I was at that point used to living on my own too, so I was just, that was part of the budget, and I was like, I cannot afford to go and have this experience. I think is going to be valuable for me understanding the tech space, to understand the VC space, while also doing a startup, while also having no income. So that's part of why I came back and worked at this other startup that was Series B. I was able to make a good
Mm,
salary, come in at a position where I could learn a lot and I could grow. So it's not just about what you're learning, it's also the job and how it's able to help you set up for the financial security you need to be able to launch into a business.
hmm
Um, so yeah, so I effectively I didn't jump full time until I already had enough savings that gave me runway for 6 months so that I could say, I'm going to put my head down, do this full time, and at least for 3 months, not think about anything else and see where we can get traction wise or
hmm
funding wise. And if in those 3 months I don't see enough, then I'm going to split my time half and half between keep doing this and seeing if we can get funding or traction and getting a new job that can pay me to refill the pot so that I
Yeah.
could have
Yeah.
more runway in the future to try again.
For sure.
Luckily for us, so that was September, of like I was doing the like moonlighting doing this from probably like February, March till September. And that was exhausting because I was working a full-time job. I was making sure I kept things very clean because I wanted to be respectful of the other job too. So it was just late nights, a lot of late nights.
Yeah.
And then made the full-time transition in September. And then we applied for some accelerators and got into Entrepreneurs Roundtable Accelerator in December is when we got the news of
Of,
that. So
of
December
2023.
of 2023. So 3 months to the timeline, 3 months after
Cool.
going full time. And so then I
Yeah.
was like, okay, great, we're doing this now.
Nice.
But I had from September, I had enough personal runway to keep my own. Like I have a roommate here in New York, but like to be in my apartment in New York, survive here on my own with my own
hmm
money through March. So that was like again, I do agree that this is a topic not discussed enough, and so like that is literally the math I was doing. Is like, okay,
Amazing.
I
Yeah.
can last till March. I need something either in the door for Alternew by December, January, or I need to
hmm
start looking for another job.
No, completely, completely. And I really appreciate you for that transparency because I think that this is a component that doesn't get discussed enough. And pe- people who, the purpose of this call is this podcast is really to shine light on the entrepreneur's journey. And obviously, on one hand, to shine light on the entrepreneur's journey, and on one hand, obviously, to discuss the sustainability issues within the fashion
Mhm.
industry and what's going on there. But you know, I want someone who's listening to this to be able to who's thinking about this and say, how can I what is my steps to do this? How can I reverse engineer my goals of being this founder, startup entrepreneur? What are the steps to get there? And the personal financial stuff is integral. I mean, to that point, and Rachel, like, what are you doing for health insurance? This isn't Italy anymore. It's
Yeah,
not free, you know?
I know. Oh, that was good times. Yeah, no, I mean, I was first on Cobra from my previous job. That's expensive, honestly. And then I was able to be put in touch with like once you get into these kind of like entrepreneur circles, like that information gets passed around. So
Nice.
I the group that got me my insurance is Indie Pop, I'm pretty sure, and so I'm on Redirect Health. But that was able to bring down my insurance, like that was able to cut my like insurance costs in half, and that helped
Nice.
a lot.
Nice.
So yeah, that's some of the, like the health insurance is a big one. I'm trying to think of other things, but maybe more loosely, I bring all this stuff up because I want to encourage. I think a lot of times there's this like, in my opinion, toxic narrative that to be an entrepreneur, to be a startup founder, you need to sacrifice it all. And that narrative one is some like bizarre hero's journey for somebody's like ego. It is not the truth. Like, we need everyone with innovative ideas to be coming to this space and contributing their knowledge, their skills to this space. And
Hmm.
again, pushing these narratives that you need to be single, without a family, like willing to go bankrupt and sleep on couches, work yourself to death. Like,
Hmm.
that cannot be the only way to become a founder. We do not have like we do not have the time to wait for just those types of people to show up with innovation. And there are so many people with so many innovative solutions and ways we can solve this problem that I feel don't hear themselves in that story, because
Mm.
it's not an attractive story and it's not a realistic story for most people unless you have a kind of comfortable safety net. Um, and so I bring all this up to say, like, I have not once had to go back and move in with my parents. I've not had to go sleep on friends' couches. Um, and it's not to say that don't go and do that if that's what you want to do. That's also great if that's how you can make it work.
Hmm.
But even just doing the math on like, what is my personal runway, going and getting a job that'll pay you well so that it
Hmm.
can fund the venture that you want to create. That is all part of the journey as well. And I think sometimes that gets missed. Sometimes people feel like, oh, but I don't want to go back to that job that's not really doing the thing I want to be doing. It's soul sucking, whatever. Like, if you have the vision of like, this job is for the next year going to help me build skills and put me in a financial position where I can go and do this amazing thing,
Hmm.
and while keeping my own financial stability or supporting my family, etc., like, that is as much a part of the of the routes to entrepreneurship as the risk it all story. So
Yeah.
they both have a place, and I just want to start pushing the narrative that is not talked about as much so that people see that there's options and there's not just one way to become a founder.
100%, and thank you for that, because that needs to be shared and needs to be told to people. Um, Going back to a little bit more of the discussion on sustainability and your work, and your professional journey, you were at Valentino, you were at Bulgari, and you saw firsthand how these business leaders within that space, specifically like luxury fashion, European luxury fashion, um, what can you say about the buying practices of these organizations when it comes to engaging with startups, innovations, etc.? You know, whether it be innovative materials, whether it be innovative service providers like yourself, that are, again, a big part of their value proposition is sustainability, is reduced emissions, is reduced environmental impact. Any
Mhm.
tidbits, any tips and tricks that you've learned along the way that you can share?
Yeah, I think well, there's a couple of things. One thing that I think when and this isn't like speaking specifically to any company I've worked at, so this is like Rachel speaking,
Sure,
not
of
on
course, of
behalf
course.
of any company. But
Yeah.
I think some things that are interesting is, while luxury companies have, the margins and the kind of flexibility to go and invest in cool new trends and things like that. And it's been so awesome to see, again, like the LVMH La Maison de Startups Accelerator, or just seeing how other brands are really adopting new trends, new business models, and like bringing these new companies in. They have a challenge of like, there is an expectation that comes with luxury that is very much at odds with startup land. Startup land is move fast and break things are going to be messy, constantly iterate. Luxury is not about move fast and break things. There are expectations to be met on the first go. And so that's where I think brands are being actually very flexible and collaborative on these fronts, but sometimes where there's a miss when working with early stage startups, that startups need to really consider are the concerns that the brands have, right? Like, how are we maintaining our image? How are we making sure it's a consistent experience that we can control? How do we make sure that this feels like an extension of this story that we've spent generations crafting, not even, like a year of the storytelling for marketing. This is luxury is generations of marketing. in storytelling and in crafting. So that, I think, keeping that in mind of like, how do you partner with these brands and what's the right way to support them while making sure that they're able to create a consistent experience for their customer. You really just need to come when you are actually ready for that stage. And I think that there's other brands that are not luxury that have more flexibility for things to be not fully buttoned up. I think some of the like newer brands, or even just brands where the customers are really coming for the innovation, it's emerging designers, it's emerging trends, it's emerging business technology. I think those folks tend to be better partners in your early stages because they're here for the messiness. They want to see you pushing the bar. And I think just if you're going to come to luxury, keeping in mind, what is it like to be a luxury company? What are they actually selling to their customers, is important. And that's why you'll see a lot of times like the trends that they follow tend to be ones that already others in the industry are following. They kind of like will all follow it together because again, this is reputational risk. Like this is when they all jumped into NFTs together. They all jumped into like, virtual like avatar skins together. Like there's a couple of them who are willing to stick their neck out, but most of them, they want to participate to stay on the edge, but it is a huge reputational risk to be wrong on those fronts. And this is beyond their core competencies. They push the limits on design and on the clothes that they are putting out onto the market, not necessarily on business models. So this is it's a interesting but scary space for them to really be innovating in because this is not how they normally work. So that's just some of the things that I think are like I learned over there that is part of why the things that I saw that would get like green lighted versus things that wouldn't get green lighted, like why that was the case, and also the things that like generally have to be kept in mind when you're working in a luxury space.
Now that's really good. That's good context to know. And makes total sense also. The risk aversion of a luxury fashion is pretty evident. Do you see a certain segment of the market being more attuned or in line with your value proposition, at least at the get-go? Is there a segment that you're getting a lot of traction with?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of things. Like one, absolutely the sustainability brands are on board trying to figure this out. You already see them making efforts in this way. In addition to that, a lot of the secondhand vintage companies are the ones who are really receptive to they're working with one of a kind product, just the nature of secondhand and vintage, and like needing to be able to repair things so they are sellable, needing to have alterations options so customers feel confident with fit even though they're buying this one of a kind piece. Those two spaces immediately get what we're doing. Luxury as well, because they know they have to. It's just basically table stakes to offer this type of stuff. But it's very hard to do that at scale across all of your doors, including smaller doors where you just don't have the same budgets, the same space, the same team sizes to account for this kind of stuff. So those are some of the main ones that I'd say are like immediately understand what we're doing, why we're doing it. The only other thing I would add is like brands that are in that like almost luxury category. So think premium, more tailored fit. Fit is important, labels, but they don't always have alteration like tailors on site, because again, it's not exactly the price point they're at where you can pay for someone to be full-time there with the space and like the machines, etc. So that's another one where they absolutely want to be able to offer these services, but it just does not make it into the budget to be able to. They don't have the margins for that, but it makes a lot of sense for their product.
That makes a lot of sense. I mean, from just off the top of my head, I buy almost everything secondhand. Obviously, I love clothing, I love fashion. That's why I'm having these conversations. But it's so funny the amount of money I spend on like fixing, tailoring, dry cleaning versus the actual clothes themselves. it's a very much of a me issue, but that's representative of a larger sort of secondhand buyer issue that is perfectly in line with your business.
Well, no, I
Hi,
think that's an interesting one because I think there's always, this is another thing that I hear a lot of people say where they're like, well, why would I get an alteration on a pair of pants where the alteration costs as much as a pair of pants? It's like, because then they look like they were made for you. Like, why?
yeah.
Like, we can optimize on price. I think that sometimes people separate the two too much, like decouple the cost of the garment with the cost of getting it altered, as if alteration should always be cheaper. I mean, we
Mhm.
should be thinking of the total cost to get a product that looks amazing on you.
Mm,
And so I think that there's a lot of education and kind of rethinking that needs to be done around understanding and appreciating the value of the workmanship that goes into alterations and repair, right? Like to
mhm,
me, and I mean, admittedly, I'm biased in this space, but it makes more sense to me that a garment that was mass produced and could, achieve those economies of scale would cost as much or less than the alteration to get it to literally go from something for anybody to something for only me.
mm,
Um, but having someone measure you and work uniquely on your garment and think about your garment for you and no one else
mhm,
is really the hours that go into it, let alone the skill required to do that, is so great that it to me seems obvious that it should cost accordingly. And so this is just, but that's because I've been in the space, and I think
yeah,
that this is the re-education we need to do as a population, as an
mhm,
industry, fashion to the consumer, to help people understand that this is just a number that should be calculated into when you're buying garments and
mhm,
getting to a closet you love, because nothing is better than when your clothes fit you perfectly. And
completely.
that can be achieved with alterations. We just need to be
Mhm,
calculating it in as the total cost of the garment when we're
yeah.
shopping, rather than treating it as this like smaller thing.
What can you speak of I'm gonna call it an uphill battle, for a lack of words,
Yeah.
in terms of educating consumers to engage in this. There's one thing to sell a business on the benefits of offering an alteration service, but then it's another discussion, let's say, of teaching consumers who are used to cheap fast fashion prices and
Yeah.
thinking of clothes as a lot more disposable than the actual construction that clothing manufacturing requires. I mean, for most people don't really understand, I think, the work that goes into creating a garment, the
Mhm.
detail and the knowledge that is required to make a shirt, a blouse, a dress, whatever. We're so far removed from that manufacturing. We're so used to cheap prices that I think consumers aren't thinking about clothing as something that should last a long time. It should be an investment in a way.
Mhm.
And I don't know. Can you speak to this idea of teaching people how to repair, how to
Yeah.
think in this manner?
Yeah, I mean, this is something we're still actively
Mm,
solving for. So I
sure.
can give what we're trying and what we think might work.
Totally. Yeah. High
But
level.
anyone listening with better ideas, please reach out. But yeah, a couple of things there. One, I think that there are two different experiences we're talking about there, right? Like people who want to buy new and see clothes as disposable. That's for certain things, right? Like people want to stay on trend. They want to be able to purchase things when a trend is hot. But there's also, and I think this goes for, I don't think this is two different types of shoppers. I think this is the same person simultaneously has pieces in their closet that they absolutely love and they never want to have to buy again. If they can keep this thing endlessly, they would. I think a lot of people like really despise the like hunt for the perfect pair of jeans. And yeah, there's certain like maybe I want a trendy like wider like jean right now because it's hot, and I wanted skinny jeans 10 years ago. But there's still a sense of like having a pair of jeans that you can keep going back to that always look good on you is something everyone desires. And when your good pair of jeans stop looking good or something happens to them and you got to restart that journey, I think everyone has a sense of dread when you got to restart that journey. And I think that goes for a lot of different pieces. So that's just one example that maybe is relatable to a larger number of people, but there's probably plenty of pieces in your closet where you're like, I would love if I never had to like, this thing is perfect. I don't want to ever rebuy this thing again. I just want this thing. And especially because clothing brands are so trend driven, you probably can't even buy it again. Like, it probably like literally just will not exist the next time you come around to get it. And so tapping into that and being like, helping people when they have something that they love get that repaired, starting there with that experience, that journey, and bringing them back into, hey, things can get repaired. This thing that you love, we love it too. We love that you love it. How do we keep this thing alive? And then planting that seed in their head of, oh, what else could I get repaired? What else do I not really need to buy again? I can just extend its own life because it's actually pretty good as is. As well as, once we get that kind of first, how can we get this thing altered so it fits amazing? And then they realize, wow, that wasn't that hard. And this, now I'm getting compliments constantly on this piece because everyone's like, wow, again, it looks like it was made for you. I think people will chase that high once they have it. And so I don't think it's a matter of trying to create this dichotomy of like, instead of buying, like, you can't buy these clothes that are, bad and disposable, etc. The shaming around that doesn't work. What we really need to do is, how do we create these similar highs around these key moments and key pieces that people already have an attachment to, so that it plants that seed in their head and they realize they can do this with everything, and that this can just be part of how they shop. I think there's other ways to solve the wanting to stay on trend stuff. I think that's rental. I think that's resale.
Yeah.
But I think getting people to alterations and repair and seeing the value of that comes from starting what's already in their closet that they love and getting them into that first alterations experience.
I think that really touches a point that I like to make, or rather, I think that really highlights a question I have for you as we're looking at the entire value chain. I always say value chain, not supply chain, because it's a lot more than just manufacturing to end of sale or cradle to gate or anything like that. What do you want to see retailers and brands do more of to operate more sustainably, besides leveraging services like yours? And at the end, what do you want to see consumers do more of besides altering their products to engage with clothes in a more sustainable manner? What's top priority for you in these two categories?
Well, okay. So what's top priority for me, obviously, is the space that I am, but to talk more generally, I think it's this, like, it's to take a systems mindset and really look at the entire business and what it's taking from the environment, as well as what it's putting back into the environment, looking at that holistically. Because I think a lot of this stuff comes from how it's designed at the out front, right? Like, when clothes are made, even, again, not to relate it too much back to alterations, but even how clothes are produced impacts what can be altered, what can be repaired.
Totally.
And so by not considering how, what kind of what kind of seam allowance we're creating, and how that limits how much you can really alter the garment. It can only go in then. It can't really be let out. When shoes are made in a way where, in the past, shoes were completely repairable. Now a lot of shoes are made in a way where they fundamentally are not repairable, and not even recyclable. So I think it's really, a lot of this is designed at the out front to create a better solution. But I think this is also being open and collaborative across the industry and working together on this. This is a real opportunity for co-opetition rather than competition. This is not my own term. I'm pulling it. I don't know its original, who coined it first, but it's commonly used in this space because we need to all work together on this, right? This is why, even as a startup ourselves, we go and we talk and collaborate with the other people in the alterations and repair space. We're talking with the people who are part of the, digital product passports, like trying to get these products on the blockchain. We're talking to rentals. We're talking to resale. we're talking to production teams, because we all need to work together in solving this problem. So I think that those are the two things I'd say is like taking a systems approach, looking at like top down at the entire business and saying from the start to the finish, where is this product? Like, how are we designing all of this, the product as well as the organization itself to create opportunities for partnerships in circularity? And then also, how are we opening our doors, opening, like sharing data, sharing ideas, joining cohorts to, test out a new business model so that we can all move faster in this space. There's too much to be solved to be trying to do this individually and trying to push out competition. We need to work together to get to where we need to be as an industry from a circular economy standpoint.
Touche. Two last questions I'll leave you with. When I think about your business and I think about this particular segment of the value chain being addressed by companies like yours, there seems to be this concept of leveraging tech to support craft, because alteration and repair is based on craft, right? It's based on tailors, it's based on cobblers, it's based on those watchmakers, and unfortunately those are all dying breeds. And as I said earlier, consumers aren't really used to engaging with those people anymore as we used to. Give me your take largely on the idea of tech enabling the larger adoption of craft in our sort of consumer goods space, both in fashion and clothes, but I mean, largely with shoes, with watches, with electronics, as we mentioned before. How can technology lead to the larger adoption of craft?
Yeah, I have so many thoughts on this. But one, I love that you bring this up. It's something that we say a lot is that we are weaving tech with tradition. And that's like our goal as Alternew. Two different things that come to mind. One, I think that the world has changed in a way where trust, convenience, those things used to just come from literally you grow up in the same area, you kind of live in the same area, you've got a guy who was the same guy, who was your mom's guy, who was your dad's guy. There was trust came from the community, from this kind of sharing of who's good. That's not the world we live in anymore, right? Like when we're buying things on Amazon, we're going to reviews. When we're looking for a restaurant, we're going to reviews. It's a much more tech driven and reviews based world for trust, and data is another thing. We look for data. How many stars do they have? How many times have they successfully done this thing? So it's just a very different world where tech is what is enabling trust when we are no longer growing up and living in the same spaces. We're moving around much more. There's just more mobility, especially for millennial and Gen Z populations. And so you can't just have a recommendation from a friend for things a lot of times. So that's one component here. And again, I think convenience, tech is what we understand to be convenience today, whether or not it is that, think of your Uber Eats, think of Uber, think of Uber Eats and like the many ZocDoc, all these different industries where they took an experience and then they added the tech so that it could increase the convenience of being able to get things done, of finding what you need. I think it's just to a certain degree how we interact with the world today. And so any industry that doesn't model that becomes naturally inconvenient as a result, because you just don't even know how to go find necessarily a person to help you with a service in any other way, because all the other industries, this is how you find people to help you complete a service. So I think that that's one large component, is tech is what is trust and convenience today. And so industries that lack that tech lack trust and convenience as a result for the current population. The second part, and then therefore people don't utilize it. The second part is that tech is what's going to bring the next generation of tailors, cobblers, etc. into the industry, because it is very challenging. folks do not give enough props to the tailors and cobblers out there, because not only do they have an incredible skill set, they also are like small business owners. And as a startup founder, which is also running a business, that is hard. That is some crazy stuff to have to do largely on your own. A lot of times these are immigrant populations as well. As someone who was an expat in a foreign country, trying to just navigate legal documents and different bureaucratic systems and try to run my, like, try to just live within the laws, right? Like, make sure you didn't mess up a visa thing or whatever. That's a lot of stress. But then doing that in not only kind of keeping yourself in the country, but integrating yourself into the country and into the economy by creating a business that creates jobs and opportunities, providing your skills to the rest of the population while jumping through the flaming hoops of, like, properly doing your taxes, properly registering your business, paying for rent, all that stuff. That is such crazy stuff. It is so hard. And, like, again, major props to these communities, these tailors and cobblers. And the thing is, the next generation doesn't necessarily want that headache, because this profession has not been supported by the industry in a way where it's an attractive profession. It's much easier to go and work in like a corporate America job where you'll get paid way more. And because these professions aren't paying that well right now. And so that's part of what we're trying to solve for. And we think that tech is a big component of it. We can improve trust and convenience if we can get more people to these services by, increasing trust and convenience. Then we can improve the general economics around this profession. But not only that, by adding tech to the actual how you run the business and giving these people a business in a box, we can make it so that if you're the next generation and you have this skill set, we need your skill set. Use the business in the box. We'll send you the business from the brands. All you've got to work on is focusing on getting better at your craft. But things like, what POS system should I use? How do I run this business and stay on top of all my projects? How do I sign things to different employees? Those are not things that people should have to be stressed and worried about, or trying to figure out how to force fit technology for other industries to their own. So that's part of why at Alternew we built the business in the box side of it. We're sending business their way because we want to bring in that next generation of talent so that we do not lose this incredibly important skill and skill set that the industry needs to become the circular economy player it hopes to be in the future.
Touche, touche. I couldn't agree more. Last question, Rachel, for you both professionally and personally. What does the next 5 to 10 years look like for you from an organizational success standpoint, and obviously personally? Where does Rachel see herself in the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, big question. I mean, my hope for the business is that we are working with hundreds of brands across the U.S. and have this full national network of tailors who are, again, prosperous, are working more efficiently and on higher quality work, that we're really able to match the right project with the right person. Because a student who's learning their craft should be the one taking on simple hems where they can really build these skills. And then as people grow in their careers, giving them that high quality, the restructuring a suit, the working on bridal alterations, all these high margin, higher skill set jobs. So just rebalancing the supply and demand side there. Again, bringing and kind of ushering in that next generation and building a connection between the existing generation of tailors and the next generation to transfer these skills. And then for me personally, I mean, I've been loving being a part of this space. The relationships are everything. Working alongside such incredibly interesting and creative and visionary people is really something I hope is still, I mean, I hope it will be a part of my next 5 years. So being able to, keep working on things that I'm so excited about, like I am today, and keep growing the relationships and collaboration with these types of people it's almost kind of like today, but with the business further along. So, yeah.
Totally. I love that. Well, I mean, I'm sure you're going to get there no matter what. Rachel, I want to Thank you so much for your time today and for this really productive conversation. I've learned a lot. I know our listeners will as well. Your body of knowledge, that's really incredible. And what you're doing is needed by the industry. I think you've really hit a segment of the market that is underutilized. So there's a lot of opportunity for you. I hope that you guys get the success that you guys deserve. I appreciate you so much, Rachel. So
Yeah,
thank you so much for your
of
time again.
course. Well, again, if anyone wants to follow along,
Yes,
you can you can find me on LinkedIn. Please reach out. Again, it's Rachel, Rachel, Sterling. And then Alternew, you can check us out online, alternew.com. And that's Alternew, like alterations new. And then also on our Instagram, Alternew_official. So any of those places you can kind of track the progress. And again, we always love collaborating. So we love when
perfect.
people reach out.